Trevor of Risk Decisions as speakers to the third edition of Project Controls Expo Virtual 2022. In this presentation, Val, Jonas, and Trevor will be talking about the value of connecting risks across the projects.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So we're delighted to be here today, wherever you are in the world. As you can see here, Risk Decisions. I'm CEO and Trevor is Technical Sales Manager. And we've got people on the ground in Toronto, in Canada, in the UK, and various places in Australia. So wherever you are, we would like to welcome you. Today, we're going to talk about how to use Predict to manage systemic risk. Just to give you a flavour of the sort of organisations we work with, they are huge organisations across the world. Here in the UK, we work with National Grid, but we work with other electricity companies across the world, not only helping manage their big projects and programs portfolios, but also across their business risks. Similarly, enormous infrastructure projects like the Fehmarn Belt Fixed Tunnel, which is joining Denmark and Germany. And in Canada, an example of one of the projects there, Hatch, big mining and infrastructure projects that they use Predict on. Defence as well, companies like BAE Systems and Kinetic use our products across the world. And here we've got an example, MTR, mass transit rail in Hong Kong, but they also use our systems, for example, in Sydney. So we are pretty much global. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, our agenda is, first of all, why connect risks across projects? And Trevor will then take over and look at how you actually identify and manage risk across systemic risk across projects using Predict. I'll come back and talk a bit about risk visualization, how you use this to make decisions and what the benefits are. And finally, some questions. Okay, so let's have a look at projects. Well, one of the things we do know about projects is that they have a lot of interdependencies. And they're also focused on delivering objectives for the business. So that's something that we recognise from things like ISO 31000, which says that risk is uncertainty against your objectives. So projects really need to manage risk in order to achieve the things the business wants. But there are a lot of problems along the way. So things like resources. How do you actually manage and share out resources across different projects? Something that's very topical in the news at the moment, supply chain. We know that there are massive problems across the world, the pandemic. In the UK, things like Brexit, got war in Europe, but also other conflicts around the world. All of these things are disrupting supply chains and not helping in terms of the costs of raw materials and everything that we just don't need trying to deliver projects on time and on budget. Some other things like regulatory and approvals, general funding issues, things like the geopolitical situation. There are risks that come from all over the place, and there are risks that sit within projects and also business risks that can sit across functional areas and from top to bottom in the organisation. So let's have a look at the project context. So projects are discrete entities, and they generally have targets to delivering scope on time and on budget. They generally have a sponsor within the organisation and possibly a whole number of stakeholders. So there are a lot of competing demands on them, and sometimes they run over very long timescales. So, for example, that project, the tunnel between Germany and Denmark, we've been working with the Fehmarn organisation for over 10 years now, and it's going to be nearly 10 years before they deliver it. So we're talking about a 20-year timescale from the beginning of concept, making the decision. They had to decide, are they going to build a tunnel or a bridge, or the environmental issues, the various stakeholders involved, the costs, looking at even things like making decisions around what would be the emissions of vehicles. It's amazing that, of course, 10 years ago, there was no concept of there being such a drive for electrical vehicles now. And so all of those things are huge uncertainties, and over these huge time scales can escalate and cause major problems. And within a project, you often have limited visibility of the business and what the context of the business is. So there are enormous risks that we're dealing with. So how do we deal with that? What are the sort of tools and techniques that we can use? Let's have a look at the enterprise and how risk is connected over the enterprise. If we start top down and we look at the enterprise generally has a portfolio of both projects, programs, and also its operations, what it's delivering. And programs are typically made up of many projects, and those may have a whole supply chain down through contractors, subcontractors, and so on. And then on the right-hand side, we have operations, and there's all sorts of logistics. And again, they've got contractors and a supply chain. And in the middle, the functional areas in our organization and supporting all of the things that go on in the business. Now, typically, management want to know what's going on, and the temptation is to have risk registers and look at risk all over the place in silos, and then try to send that risk information up to the organization. And that's a nightmare, because these days management really do need to know what's going on, and not just next week or the end of the month. They want to know now. To add to that, there's also side-to-side information going to and fro, because programs exist in an operational environment, and also the functions need to support projects and operations and the business generally. So while the business is asking for risk information to be sent up from all these risk registers everywhere, and they've got risks at their own level, the business needs good risk intelligent decisions flowed down. So I'm going to go on to talk a little bit more about projects, so programs and the portfolio level. And then Trevor's going to come on to talk about how we join together a lot of these risks. How do we gather them together, look at them in a systemic way, and also how can things like the functional areas work? So let's look at the program context. Well, programs have got projects, they've got oversight of the projects, they look after the projects. And while it's tempting to say, well, a program is just a bunch of projects that have some common links and objectives between them, actually the significant main focus that programs have is achieving benefits. They've got to focus on making sure that the projects not only deliver on time and on budget and the scope that were promised, but they're actually going to deliver the benefits to the business. It's their job to secure resources and make sure that any interdependencies between different projects are reconciled, protect them. There's a sort of what you call it, servant leadership type role that programs have, making sure that they're a sort of benevolent force, ensuring the projects can work in a protected way, but making sure that they are working within the business context. And one of the key things that they need to do is identify and help manage systemic risks. And we'll talk about that a bit later. How can you actually save money doing that? Because it's a significant opportunity you have to save budget. Then we move up to the portfolio context. And here we can see that there is another level of focusing on project up to business. The portfolio context, while there's a level of governance at project, program, and portfolio level, but in this case, the portfolio generally has the go, no go decision making to do. Things like gates, when you get to a gated stage in the project, is the project ready to proceed? Helping identify and manage the business risks that affect the projects, and make sure that you're protecting the business goals and objectives, and so keeping an eye on the programs. So that gives an overview of the interconnected nature of risk across your business, from programs and via projects up through the portfolio into the business. So I'm going to hand over to Trevor, and he's going to talk you through how you use predict, connect risk. So what we see on the screen here is the biggest screen is Predict Risk Controller. That's where we hold all our risk and actions. It's a database. So no more spreadsheets, no more gathering together and trying to stitch together different disparate bits of information. And Trevor will show you how you can, although of course it's one single database, you can have different perspectives. So you can have your own flavor of risk. You can have your own values and impacts and different perspectives can be represented within folders, but also can be reconciled up through the business to the top level. He's also going to show you Risk Analyzer, which is the Monte Carlo simulation tool, which is fully integrated down in the bottom right. And also our newest addition to the Predict suite is Risk Visualizer, just slightly left of center, which gives you the ability to link risks together, look at all sorts of exciting ways of creating and facilitating risk discussions. These visualizations are so important to get people talking about risk, especially at leadership level, not looking at huge lists of risks, but actually looking at how what's the picture of risk? How do I pinpoint the things that I really need to focus on? And of course, all of this is available on the cloud and is compliant with the expected standards like 31,000. So, Trevor, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thanks, Val. All right. What we'll do then is we will go in and have a look at Predict Risk Controller, as Val said. And if I go here, I think Val sort of begun to mention some of this here. We're looking at our folder view here. So let's just give you a brief explanation. I've got a number of projects folders down here that are part of a program that fits in with the particular organization that I've got here. And so at the moment, I'm looking at just the risks within my project A, and we can begin to see, I can actually choose which data I want to see in my list view, just to basically to make it easier to work with. So here we can see the risks I've got: planning approval delayed. Actually, Val's mentioned Fehmarn earlier. That's certainly one of the ones that's taken them a while to get all of the approvals they've needed from both Denmark and Germany to get their ability to build.
Yeah, that's an EU project as well, isn't it? So government money, so an awful lot of hoops to jump through, regulations and so on.
Yeah, that's right. So then over here, I'm looking at the score of the risk. So I'm taking into account the probability of the risk occurring and looking at the impacts that might occur as well, and creating a score and fitting that into a grid. Oh, he says, come on here. You can see we're sitting quite near the top. So we're looking here that this particular risk is scored in the top right there. It's a score of 15 that we've got there at the moment, but that's based upon the criteria that are specific to this particular project. Now, if we move up a little bit here, this is one of the sort of the differences straight away from a spreadsheet. I'm now up at the program level, and I'm looking at all of the risks within the program itself, and all of the different projects below that. Okay, so straight away, that's a lot easier than just trying to join spreadsheets together.
So, Trevor, we're looking at the 3 projects now and the program risks. But I thought, looking at this, it looks like it's sorted the risks by risk score in that second from right column.
Yes,
so right. But I see a red one kind of just above our pictures. Why is that?
Right, yeah. Well, remember I was saying that the score is based upon the criteria at the project level. If I click on this one here, and I think we've just about got there. Here we go. Eventually, you will see that this particular project C, is using a different scoring system than the one we looked at before. Remember, project A had a 5x5 grid. Here I've got a 3x3 grid. So this is the score based upon the criteria at the project level. Right?
Okay, so not many projects use 3x3 grids anymore, but I have seen some smaller projects, the ones that want to keep it much simpler, sometimes do that. So what you're saying is you can take a view of different size grids and different scoring thresholds, and you can view them all in one view.
That's what we were doing there, but as you pointed out, the score isn't effectively measuring the same thing. Okay, because what I can do here now is I can say, okay, I want to to change everything and base the score on, for example, my corporate scoring system. And that now gives me the same list of risks. And I think it's just about to come. Here it comes.
Yeah, so there's lots of ways that you can filter and set
there's
criteria on the list then.
Yes, that's right. There's all sorts of things on that list there. But there we go. Right, so now we've got the same list of risks. You will see that most of the risks now, especially sort of below the high and the medium ones, have all become low. That's because the thresholds that we're using with my corporate perspective are much higher than they are at the individual project level. So the risks effectively end up with a lower score.
So what you've done here is, instead of having somebody spend a whole afternoon trying to pull some Excel spreadsheets together, you've just reset the list and you got it straight away.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, well, that sounds like a good saving on time, because I like my risk managers to spend time actually helping manage the risks, not fighting with Excel spreadsheets. So, okay, that's a tick.
All right, thank you. Right, so the other thing, right, so now I'm looking at this list of all of these risks again, then I can begin to see just by a little bit. In fact, I need to move back to my original score. It's always good to do these things back so we know where we are. Right, there we go. So yeah, so now we've got them back at that original view, and I can begin to spot things in the list. For example, yeah, we're trying to look for systemic risks, and I can see here, purely because they happen to be next to each other, that there are a couple of supplier bankruptcy risks. Right? So yeah, I was fortunate in being able to find those, but it's a lot better if I start just doing a general search.
Yeah, well, I would probably say only two.
Well, that's right,
that all?
because those just happened to be two that were next to each other. Yeah, in the list we were looking at the time. Okay, so when I do a general search, there we go. We can see actually I found 12 risks, and you can see over on the right hand side here, they're across all sorts of different folders. And interestingly, I can also see sitting over here under actions found that there were a number of controls that we've got in place to try and reduce the risk of supplier bankruptcy.
Okay, but can anybody just search over the database and look at anything then?
Yes, very much so. But they will only ever see risks and actions that they are authorized to see.
Okay, so there's a level of permissions. So you can just give somebody only a program or only the project they're in or whatever. But if you're a senior management level, you could search across everything.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Okay. So that was one way of searching, but we can also create ourselves customized lists. So here I've created one about planning risks. And you can see here it's found some risks that have got plan within the name. This one's been chosen because in fact there's planning in the description as well. So you can be very precise about the sorts of search and the criteria that you want to use. Right? But now I've got this list and they're all about planning. Then I want to actually tag all of those, and I can just tick there to select them all. And I can now say, okay, I want to change my functional area category, and we want to set that to planning would make sense.
So you've got functional area doesn't have anything in that column at the moment.
That's correct. That's correct. Right. I could choose to append it. I'm going to overwrite it just in case there was anything else in that already. I just want them to be planning. Once I've got my list there, I've just tagged those as planning. We'll see that tagging coming in hopefully later. But the next thing I can do is I can analyze this risk. You mentioned Predict Risk Analyzer earlier. And the reason I'm wanting to do this is to try and work out what my total exposure is to those planning risks.
Okay, so you've taken is this all the risks in the program and
No,
the
this is
project
just
underneath
those
it?
planning risks that I'd identified.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Okay.
the four, yeah, okay.
Yep, and in fact, you can see on the right-hand side, the top right here, there are the 4 risks there. The approval delayed and the 3 planning approval delayed ones. Okay, and what this is showing me is the distribution of the total cost of those 4 risks through 1,000 or so iterations. All right, so I've tried it. So sometimes one risk occurred, sometimes all 4 risks occurred, and there was a range of potential values for each of those risks as well. And what it's showing me is that 90% of the time, I'm looking at the bar chart on the left, then those risks will cost me less than, well, essentially 6 million. Right? If I wanted to have a look at a different confidence level, I can move the value down on the slider, so you can get different values as well. But more than that, the important bit you might have noticed just next to our picture is that we're getting a value for the particular risk that I've highlighted. So if I change,
what's the number down the bottom then?
That's it. So what it's basically saying is that if we remove the highlighted risk, which is the black one, T7 there, then our 80% confidence will be reduced by just over 1 million. Okay. If I click on a different risk, then we will see the impact of removing that specific risk. And you'll see that approval delayed one at the top, if we removed just that one, we would effectively be halving, in fact, over halving our potential exposure there. Right?
So just by removing that one risk, we could take our risk exposure or the amount of contingency or management reserve from 6 million down to getting on for about 3 million. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's the next question I guess I would want to ask is how much is that going to cost me though? Or
good point. Well, yeah, we've got to work out. We've got to work out how we can do it as well. That's right. So this is showing us the what if. It's trying to.
Mind you, I've worked on a project before. It was a bid that I was helping with, where there were 2 very, very big risks. And basically they swamped the project. They were what we call tombstone risks. If they occurred, then the project would have been dead in its tracks. It was a rail project actually. And we've successfully negotiated with the customer that those risks should be held by the customer. So we were able to reduce the amount of contingency that we needed to hold. And the customer kind of went, well, okay, if the risks happen, it's going to come back on me anyway. Because it's ludicrous expecting a project to take on unbelievably large risks, especially if they say it's small probability.
That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So just sort of thinking about other information we can get out of here, I can do a quick report that just takes longer to go through the network, and it is sort of giving me a range of the overall exposure that we've got. And there you go. So we can now see that that was the 90% there. I was 90% confident it was going to cost us just less than 6 million, but there's still even down at 10% of the time I'm going to have to be over 1 million. So what I'm thinking of is that those risks all put together, that's really sort of the range of potential impacts that I've got. So one of the things I can do is, if we come back to the to risk controller, is I can create at the program level now what I've called here a planning parent risk. Okay, so I want to use that information that I've grabbed out of Risk Analyzer to hold the individual, pull all of those individual risks together as one thing. Because if the planning,
so we're looking at the detail of a single risk, but this isn't just an ordinary risk; it's a parent risk.
That's why I've called it a parent risk, and we can see that down here where we can link things together, and you can see these. Eventually, when you get there, the 4 risks that have actually been linked to this parent.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, I can also, and we'll see this a bit later, generically link things together as well. All right. But the parent-child relationship is the one I'm explicitly using to hold that information. And in fact,
so what's the benefit of? I mean, okay, we kind of know that we can look at a list of these that they're all related, but what's the actual benefit of having a parent risk?
right. Well, there's two sort of things here. One, I've pulled that analysis information together, and I've created that, used that information as my assessment of the potential impact of this risk. All right. And hopefully you can see that sitting in the middle there. I've used those three values that we got as the 10, 50, 90 from the analysis, right? So I can begin to see what the overall impact of these systemic planning risks could be, rather than just having each individual one, right? But more,
and that kind of explains why you call, a lot of, well, if you look at the ISO standards for project program portfolio, they talk about management reserve, and the idea is that you hold risk budget at a higher level. So in this case, we would be managing those planning risks at the program level, not down at the project level. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's right. And in fact, I've put down here, I'm now putting an action at the program level to try and mitigate all of those planning risks.
Okay, so you're actually instead of each of the projects having to try to do mitigation actions, or, well, they might still have some local ones, but you can actually put something together at the higher level.
That's right. That's right. And you mentioned the cost. Well, I've estimated this one here is going to cost me about $50,000 at the moment. All right. But what I'm hoping or expecting is that if these actions are successful, then my cost impact will be reduced down, and therefore, as you can see up here, my score will get reduced as well. I'll get down from the very high to a high assessment.
Okay, so we've been looking at this from a sort of program level now. What about taking it to a higher level? Because this is the sort of discussion you'd have around the business case. But what about getting people at a more senior management level involved in agreeing the decision making on this? Because what we had before was, on the left-hand side of that diagram, we had risk information going upwards to management, but we need to make decisions. We need to make risk intelligence decisions coming down on the right-hand side through the organisation. So, got anything you can offer me on that?
Well, I've got a couple of things as visualizations, because I think that's what we were talking about. So the first things I wanted to look at is we can compare a view at sort of what I'm calling the program level, where we're looking at having that risk, all of that planning risk held at the program level, versus taking it away from the program and having the individual risks down at the project level. Right, so it's just a different perspective for people to be able to see where the potential impacts are likely to be.
Okay, so I'm looking, the left-hand pillar is the program, and the right-hand three are the projects. So yes. So I can view it either as a project view and how it would impact budgets on the projects, or taking it out of the projects and looking at a program level.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly which of those two slides you were looking at the time when you say that.
Oh, well, I think I was looking across both of them. It's all right. I've got good memory.
That's great. So, but the last thing is one of our favourite, is that, remember, we could see how some of those risks were linked to each other when we looked at the parent. Well, what we can now do is we can actually use Predict Risk Visualizer and say, well, okay, show me those linkages, please. And also, let's see how they're grouped together based upon that functional area on again. And when that runs.
So functional area, this is where the middle of my diagram, I had the functions all helping the projects and the business to deliver. So
this now is a great little diagram. We can see Those were the ones we added that planning to my planning risks. But we can begin now to move around here and just see how things are connected, or in some cases, how they're not connected.
So these are all these dots are risks, are they? And so you've got different you've got different colours, and I think, I mean, I can see on the right hand side it talks about velocity, but that's a ring? Yeah,
the velocity. Not many of these risks have got velocity on them at the moment. That's actually something that we developed specifically with a customer who wanted a different measure. They wanted to see how quickly they might be impacted if the risk event occurred. Right.
Okay.
So that was another one. But the coloured dots are the score, and we're using the same colours as we had on our registers before. But
okay, so it's quite difficult to see. What's that risk that's got lots of things coming out of it? The sort of spidery one.
So we've got one sitting here. That's one of our finite delayed risks. You'll see it pop up over there in a minute. So it's actually only got a relatively low score. I'm assuming that's the one you were meaning there.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, I can see it. See the hover on it now.
So when I hover over it, it's telling me it's got a medium score. So if we were looking at this in our risk list, it wouldn't really stand out at all. Okay, which is why this is so important, that we can now see, well, actually, individually, it's not that important, not that serious, but looking at going out to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other risks, some of which then move on to others as well. It's almost, as you said, I think it was great, at the center of a spider's web. So it's that extra interaction that it's got with those other risks that is the start of those conversations that you mentioned at the beginning. And that's what it's about. It's letting people think about these risks now. Is this the way I would expect it? All right, that is more important. Let's go in and have a look at it. If I double click on here, it will take me to that risk again. But unfortunately, we haven't got time for that now because I'm just looking. We've only got about 5 minutes or so left. So.
Okay, but this is a great way of getting the functions talking to each other, where you've got, here we've got procurement and health and safety and engineering, and it's possible then to get them to look at how their risks in different places impact on each other.
That's right. Yeah, it is. That's it.
I'd quite like to see an IT. Oh no, there is IT in here. Oh, why has that only got 2 risks in it?
IT people are always perfect. So that's not.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about what are the benefits. So, well, first of all, systemic risk aggregation. So systemic risk, it's not just about identifying, pulling up lots of lists of risks. It's actually aggregating them both from an analysis point of view, where you can bring them together and say, what's the budget, the contingency budget you might need for this, but also what does that mean in terms of being able to save money, focusing on individual, say, parent risks, like you showed, Trevor, the common mitigation and controls you might be able to put across multiple risks. All of that is hugely valuable. And making sure that we are seeing this as perspectives across the whole organization, being able to inform senior management so they can make good, well-informed, intelligent decisions around risk. And an extra benefit we haven't talked about is lessons learned, because if you get a new project come on stream, then you would probably want to use those parent risks and say, is there a risk that arises in this new project that ought to come under this umbrella? The other thing that we looked at was risk visualization, risk visualizer. And this is a great way of engaging people in risk conversations, seeing the risks clustered together, the velocity, so many bits of information on a single risk, rather than trying to look at these lists of risks, which, to be quite honest, just kind of people get pretty bored with. But being able to look at it as a picture is fantastic. Things like identifying missing risks, the risks like the one with lots of spiders' legs coming out of it that could eventually lead to catastrophes, and being able to look at a risk and trace back to where the potential risks leading up to it might be, where there's a knock-on effect. Okay, so to finish off, we thought you might like some further reading. So we've got the Risk Intelligence White Paper, We've got a blog post which talks about visualizing risk, a case study, that's the Femin one. If you're interested in having a little bit of read about that project, and also some information on our Predict Risk suite of tools. So I think that we've got a very short amount of time left if anybody's got any questions. But I would like to say thank you all for listening. Right, are there any questions? I don't know whether, can I see
just before before we finish, Val,
Yep.
can I ask about actual examples of customers that you've worked with that have been using parent-child relationships? I mean, we've sort of
okay. Yeah, because it's interesting. We do ITTs. We answer bids for people, looking at purchasing Predict, and we very, very often now have the requirement for parent-child relationships. Actually, most organisations are still don't quite have the maturity to use them. But one of them we worked with was in the defence industry, and they did some fantastic work. And mostly they were bringing together groups of risk under a parent in order to gather them to have central actions. They wanted, and they saved a whole bunch of money because they found that individual projects were just doing the same action over and over again, whether it was in procurement, it was in IT, it was resources, and the common theme was that they were functional. They were often functional areas, but sometimes they were also common risks like today, the big things of supply chain, rare earth materials, metals, getting raw materials from around the world. And actually, the whole point of these central functional areas are to help projects, help the organisation do that from a central point of view. So you've got to be careful that you don't just bring risk into one, put all your eggs in one basket. I remember one organisation that was they sourced, they thought they were being very clever to source all their chips from one supplier. Well, microchips is a huge problem around the world. That one supplier had failed on them, and then they were left with nothing. So there, you have to look at risk at the functional level as well as manage it on behalf of all the projects. But you have a strategy. It's all about putting together a strategy. So yeah, that's and they really managed to do that very well. I think they saved a lot of money, and also they were the functions could actually show that they were adding value to the business, adding value into the projects. So yeah, really successful.